Hey, today I'm going to go over my May reading wrap-up with you all. Everything that I read in the month of May. It was kind of a slow reading month, it felt like, for me at least. I read a lot of shorter books, which for me at least is a tendency to show that I'm lacking concentration for some bigger books that I may be wanting to read, instead focusing on just getting through the little ones while I can. I've also been sick, so it's been hard to speak out loud for long periods of time. I'm going to start with the fiction, and then we'll go on to the nonfiction I read. The first fiction novel I read is really a novella. It's quite short. It Lasts Forever, and Then It's Over by Anne de Marcken. This is a dystopian novel that it's a zombie book, though it doesn't explicitly say those words or zombie anywhere in the text, but we are in a landscape that is ravaged by some terrible disease, illness, causing the collapse of society as we know it, and we're following a main character who has decomposing limbs. There is a crow in her chest that is in her body that is deteriorating, and kind of rotting flesh all everywhere. This crow is both treated as literal and figurative, and this is a book that I saw described as really profound and moving in its conversations about grief and loss, death, life. But for me, I didn't really connect to this at all. I just wasn't into it. It reminded me, though they're totally dissimilar books in like plot, it reminded me a little bit of my experience with Alone with You in the Ether that I read, I think now, gosh, over a year ago, where it was just so hyped up for the beautiful writing, and I could see where it was, where people were getting that from, but for me, I just felt absolutely nothing. It kind of made me feel a little like disillusioned and cold towards the writing, this kind of supposed depth that I was supposed to find there, but I wasn't, made me feel like this just wasn't the right book for me. The next fiction book I read was Mornings in Jenin by Suzanne Abulhawa. This is a book I mentioned, I think, briefly in another video when I had just gotten it from the library. This is historical fiction following a Palestinian family in the aftermath of the 1948 Palestinian War, which resulted in the creation of the State of Israel. The family is disbanded, and in the midst of their displacement, their very young son is taken by an Israeli soldier and raised, as a part of their family going forward. The family that we are following, the Palestinian family, the main character that we are with is Amal, who is the sister of this, brother who has, in her mind, just disappeared. She was so young and didn't have really an awareness of what her parents were grieving when it came to losing a child like that. And she is on a path of exploring her own family history, which, due to the circumstances of being a Palestinian family, is very fraught with trauma and displacement and these gaps in their own family history. So Amal is searching for identity and belonging. We do not have the perspective of the brother, who is being raised as an Israeli child now at this point. We are solely focused on Amal and her experience growing up. It both had a lot of just well-researched information throughout the entirety of the novel on the historical context of the 1948 war and the aftermath, and what it was really like for these families in their generations to follow. The author is a Palestinian woman So of course she is speaking from her own family histories here in writing this historical fiction novel. I did find this just very beautiful and of course very tragic in its subject matter, but very impactful in the way that it made me feel and the additional historical context it gave me as well. The Book of Goose by Yiyun Li. This is a book I've been wanting to read for a while. I was in a way challenged to read this by my friend Isa, who read this book and hated it. So of course our curiosity lie in would I hate it as well. Typically me and Isa have the same opinions, but in this case I didn't hate this book. I actually liked it. I didn't love it, but I did really enjoy it. Yiyun Li is an author I've been exploring recently. This was the first fiction book that I read from her. This book is also historical fiction, and it follows two girls, Fabienne and Agnes, who are French girls growing up after World War II. They are teenagers, and they have a funny little relationship with one another. They are best friends, and this novel is hyper-focused on them and their friendships. There's few other characters mentioned, though there are other characters that are important, but it really is just centered around the relationship between these two girls. Fabienne is more of the storyteller, but Agnes becomes, as they kind of decide amongst themselves, the writer of stories. Fabienne has a much more interesting background, seemingly. We're in Agnes's perspective, so we're only seeing Fabienne through her eyes, but Fabienne is seen as a girl who's a little more unkempt and unruly in her ways. She is almost something that Agnes wants to emulate, but it isn't in Agnes's, true nature to be in that way. They have their differences. They agree to write a novel. The novel will be told by Fabienne and using Fabienne's storytelling skills, but will be written by Agnes. So they go about writing this novel, and through the help of another character who's quite complicated, do end up getting their novel published, but it is only published with Agnes's name on it as the sole author of this book. And it gains attention. It gains fame in a way. It is seen as this real gritty look at rural, wild French girls, and there is death in it, death of children. It's, almost shocking in its nature, but appreciated for its rawness, and it gains them attention. But it only gains Agnes the attention because she is the one who has her name on the book. Agnes is then sent to a prestigious boarding school to hone her writing skills as she is now getting press and attention. People are interested. Who is this young girl who wrote this book, and what is she going to write next? This poses a problem, the separation of Fabienne and Agnes. It's difficult to be apart, and they can only communicate through writing letters to one another. Fabienne is writing to Agnes, who's away at the boarding school, and demands her to basically write 2 letters, one to Fabienne and one to an imaginary boyfriend, a lover, a teenage lover. But that teenage lover, again, is entirely fabricated and is actually Fabienne. Fabienne herself will now write 2 letters in reply, one coming from Fabienne to Agnes and one from this imaginary boyfriend to Agnes. I think this is just, it just kept me thinking about this, throughout the novel, how interesting that idea was and what Fabienne's motivations were behind it, and Agnes's willingness to go along with such a seemingly silly and frivolous kind of idea. But she goes along with it, and she begins to write to both Fabienne and this imaginary lover, and it really plays with her mind a little bit, and her emotions, and of course affects the relationship with Fabienne. I thought this was beautifully written, though I can see where Isa and other people may have problems with the writing being maybe a little too try hard in its ways of making things sound profound or deeper than they really are. To my understanding, it felt very authentic to me, the profoundness and philosophical questions that were weaved into this work. I think because I did read Yiyun Li's other work of nonfiction prior to this, I could really understand her as a writer in the things that she is concerned with thinking about, and I saw those things apparent in the Book of Goose as well. We continued in reading the Hunger Games trilogy, the original trilogy, this month by reading Catching Fire. I read that aloud with my partner Kyle, and we loved it. It was a lot of fun. We've slowed down a bit, as you might be able to tell. I'm sure I've been sick. My voice isn't normal or the same as it usually is right now, so I've been struggling to read aloud or speak for long periods of time aloud right now because of being sick. But we are continuing with Mockingjay. For me, this is the total nostalgia factor. I love this original trilogy so much. Catching Fire is so fun. I love the way that the games were played out in Catching Fire, with just the new intricacies and twists that come into play. It is nice to see the story broaden up so wide, and I don't know, it's silly way to say it, but really you can totally see where the spark has lit the flame in this one. Artemis by Andy Weir. I read this with my sister Ella for a little book challenge that we're doing, and this was one of the worst books I've read this year so far. Maybe the worst. I'd have to, see where we get to at the end of the year, if that is actually true with some more distance between it, but I can definitely say I thought this book was terrible. Ella was in agreement with me. This is a science fiction novel. Andy Weir is very popular for his book The Martian and other books. I think this is one of his lesser popular books, though I'm sure it's still very, very well read by people and probably enjoyed, which is surprising given how kind of garbage the whole book was, in my opinion. You are following a girl who is meant to be about my age, like my actual age now, of 25, 26, maybe 27 years old. But she is written like a 13-year-old boy, like through and through. It's so cringe. The dialogue that takes place in this book, the inner thoughts of this character are really just gave me the ick. It gave me the ick. That's what this book did. Seriously, gave me the ick. She is constantly making sex jokes, talking about how attractive she is. She's incredibly self-centered. Actually, everyone in this book is super self-serving, which is in itself not a problem. Like, selfish people, they make great characters. As I haven't told you anything about the plot of this book, and I'll just try to keep it simple. We are set on the moon, which has a colony on it. Our main character lives there, and she coordinates with smugglers bringing things in from Earth to the moon, the distribution of those smuggled goods to their buyers. She kind of gets wound up in this big plot of needing to destroy different stuff at a company so that someone else can then take over the share of the oxygen that is being supplied to the colony on the moon. It's very complicated, and it gets more and more complicated when you just realize that this is all just kind of like not interesting at all. And I think a lot of it had to do with every single character feeling exactly the same. And really the biggest like glaring kind of thing about this that made that so disappointing, and I think just poor execution and writing overall, was that on paper these characters are all very different than one another. You have a main character who is from Saudi Arabia and a woman, but has kind of cast off the traditional lifestyle of how she was raised. You have her father, who is a practicing Muslim. You have people of all different ethnicities and races on the moon, and you have a gay character, people of all ages, but the reality is that every single character is written like just like a white 13-year-old boy. They're all so bland and just like kind of gross in their thinking. And again, like I mentioned earlier, they're all very self-serving. There's a few things that I will just mention and let this sit with you if you have any interest in reading this book. I suggest you don't. There is a mention of moon poon, a reusable condom that we are constantly asking our main character if she has tested yet, and also that the big dome shapes of the little colony settlements on the moon really look like boobs to our main character. So if you're interested in reading this book, I recommend you don't. It's not worth it. Final fiction book I'll mention just briefly, The Grapes of Wrath by John Steinbeck. Continuing our reading of Steinbeck this year, we finished The Grapes of Wrath. This was good, though slow to start. We follow the Joad family as they come from Oklahoma to California during the Dust Bowl in pursuit of the American dream. They're looking for good jobs and a home to call their own where they can raise their large family. And I won't speak anything more about that here because I did make a video dedicated to that book, which I will link. Another great entry in Steinbeck's work, and with an absolutely killer ending, I will say. And we are now continuing with Tortilla Flat, which has been fun already. Now for the nonfiction. All and Nothing, Inside Free Soloing by Jeff Smoot. This is a climbing book. It is all about free soloing, which is climbing without a rope and at a height where it is likely, if you fall, that you would experience serious injury or even death. This book is hyper-specific to that kind of climbing. It is about the psychology of this climbing style a bit, but also as Jeff Smoot he's a storyteller, he's a rock climber. He is telling stories of his own personal experiences and other climbers that he has run into who like to free solo and the situations they've got them in and what this is adding to their lives. There are very few kind of studies into free soloing or just different kinds of extreme sports or activities that people engage in that are death-defying in a way. He does refute the idea that, people who like to push the limits in this way are suicidal or they have something wrong with them or, they really want to die deep down inside if they're risking it like this. He pushes back against that. I found the anecdotal stories charming, as they always are. I have read Hangdog Days by Jeff Smoot, and I really liked that book. That is a very good book if you are into climbing. This, I would say, wasn't as strong as Hangdog Days, really nowhere near as strong, but still well worth a read if you are a climber. And I absolutely recommend reading the physical copy, which we did not do. We listened to this on audio, Kyle and I, and it was terrible. Just the audiobook production was absolutely garbage. There were mispronunciations of people's names, climbing terms, all sorts of things. And, not to fault Jeff Smoot, I'm sure that as a book that probably took a lot to get published, being that it is on such a niche topic and everything, there was virtually probably little budget for the audiobook production. It wasn't read by him. It must have, been hired, it was hired out to somebody, but it really is just such a bummer to hear such poor execution of, you got to get people's names right. You got to get the terms right. I think that it definitely detracted from the listening experience for both of us. Every time he said Alex Honnold's name as Alex Hanold and Pitons as Pittons was painful to listen to. A Short History of Transmisogyny by Jules Gill-Peterson. This is a nonfiction book that I read for Sunny's book club, who I have been watching on YouTube for, gosh, a long time now. One of the people who I've just been consistently watching for years, and has really just made me want to talk about books as well, particularly talk about nonfiction that I find super valuable. It is, as it says, a history of transmisogyny. I think that it was very strong in its opening, in defining terms and the kind of origins of transmisogyny. I was very fascinated in the history of British colonial rule over India that it's discussed in this book, and it just was quite challenging for some reason. I don't know if it's just, I just haven't been feeling very good this month. I've been having hard times concentrating, and I think that unfortunately I had trouble with this book, perhaps due to that, but it was also quite challenging. I did get a lot out of the book club discussions on this after I finished it. I think it should have been longer. I mean, it's right there in the title, short history. Just needed more, or for being so short, it should have been more broad in its scope and more general, because I found as we got deeper into the book, we were using just very, very specific examples of people and experiences that I think would have been, they weren't irrelevant things at all. They were very relevant, but given the mission of this book, I think the focus should have been more on the broad look at this rather than these like hyper-specific moments. Though I did learn a lot, I think it was good, and I really find a lot of value in the books that Sunny picks for her book club. In connection to that last book, I then read I'm Afraid of Men by Vivek Shraya. This is a memoir of a trans bisexual woman's experience. Shraya is an artist of many kinds and is a good writer as well. This is also very short, and I think added to my understanding of transmisogyny in a way that almost was more valuable than A Short History was, because it was so personal. She uses the pronoun you throughout this memoir in a way that is very affecting, because you is both used to address people in her life that she is speaking to, people of the past. You is first used to talk about another kid that she sees in elementary school at the time when she was a boy and was one of the only people of color at their school. The use of you in a book is, I think, very interesting, and there's another author that I'll talk about next who also uses this same kind of, strategy or word choice to make their point very clear. There were some things that made me take pause in Shraya's book. I was listening to it, so I did literally pause and rewind when I heard this quote. Not being into girls, however, is sometimes less about sexual preference and more about disdain. And when I heard that, it made sense in the context that Shraya was using that conclusion. She was using it right after speaking about experiences of being in gay clubs and gay spaces where gay men have excused their coming on to women in a way that may be inappropriate as okay because they aren't into women. And I'll say it again. Not being into girls, however, is sometimes less about sexual preference and more about disdain. Now, I understood it in the context of what she was speaking about, but if you take that quote on its own, I was just trying to think about it more. I then started to think about this quote from my own perspective, because I'm someone who isn't into women sexually, and if that quote made any sense when I'm thinking about it in terms of myself. Not being into girls, however, is sometimes less about sexual preference and more about disdain. And I don't disdain women. I find women so beautiful and amazing and empowered. And it just sparked such an interesting conversation as well. I then started talking to one of my close friends, Chris, who is a gay man. So he also is not sexually attracted to women. I wanted to also talk about it with him. And if I think this is true or not, if it can be true in regards to the way some people act and see women and not for others. I just wish this was elaborated on more. That was a big takeaway from this book, and sparked an interesting conversation with me and my friend Chris, and also made me question myself. I feel confident in saying I definitely don't disdain women, but making me wonder, are there parts of myself that have internalized misogyny that affect my ways of viewing women in any way? I don't know. I'm kind of rambling and not really making much sense probably, but just things to think about, and that's why I love reading. Now, another author who uses the you pronoun in their memoir, Citizen, an American Lyric by Claudia Rankine. This is an essay collection about racism, both experienced by the author herself as a Black woman, but also essays about racism that's on full display through the media or in other ways. I really appreciated her essay on Serena Williams. I thought it was fantastic. Like Shraya did, she uses the pronoun you throughout the work to address different people that she's interacting with. Oftentimes these are really negative interactions. The you is someone who is mistreating her. And again, as the reader, you cannot help but to read the you as you, the reader. And again, I just find that such a fascinating choice as an author. I think it is very effective for making for an engaging piece of work and really gets someone's attention. This was my first book by Claudia Rankine, and it was good. I think that it wasn't anything that I found entirely new territory. The essay that I loved so much on Serena Williams and the way that she has been mistreated by the media is something that I've definitely read a lot about before, but I do think Rankine does a great job of explaining it. And she is a poet as well. There are parts of this book that are more lyrical than others. I had a little harder time connecting to those pieces or finding myself as interested in them necessarily. I really do not ever listen to poetry on audiobook. I don't think it's effective for me in terms of retaining and understanding what I'm listening to. So because I was listening to this on audio, and there's just like some lyrical or poetic parts thrown in here, I didn't really kind of catch those and have them make an impact on me as much as the other essays in this piece. Next thing I read was Scum Manifesto by Valerie Solanas. Valerie Solanas was the woman who infamously shot Andy Warhol. She almost nearly killed him. She is a very divisive person. Valerie Solanas and Andy Warhol did have a relationship. This didn't come out of nowhere. Valerie wrote a play called Up Your Ass, and she thought it was quite good, had potential, and she asked Andy if he would produce it. And he took her manuscript, found it quite promising, and, kind of gave her a maybe yes, and ultimately decided against it. This certainly bothered Solanas, and she asked for the manuscript back, which is totally reasonable. Give me my work back then if you don't want it. And he lost it or misplaced it. That's what he told her. I can't find it. And that really, I think, set the spark for, you know, what happened next. So, Scum Manifesto is very, very controversial. It argues for the elimination of all men from the planet, and that women should come together and pursue a utopia that is entirely ran, sustained by women. And it is in their best interests to, you know, be fully against men. There is some controversy over whether scum actually stands for Society for Cutting Up Men. I was reading more into that after reading this, and it is very confusing because while Valerie Solanas never said that's what it meant, and she did actively refute that's what it meant, she also did publish an advertisement, you know, published by her that did have that acronym spelled out. So seems like kind of ambiguous as to whether that's what it means or not. But if you read the words in the manifesto, yeah, she's all for cutting up the men, which is really radical. She is a radical feminist. I read this out of really just like curiosity. What was this woman on about? And Valerie Solanas, again, this is outside of this book. I was just reading more about her. Really had such a tragic end. She was institutionalized. She did serve time for nearly murdering Andy Warhol. And as she got older, she was virtually homeless and destitute. She died fairly young. And while she was found with more of her writings, none of them were ever published. I only found this on Wikipedia, but I didn't find it written elsewhere in like the obituaries I read of her or just in other articles. So I don't know how valid it is, but I will say there hasn't been anything else published by her. So I'm assuming that this likely is true, that her mother actually burned all of her remaining papers and belongings. So there isn't anything to read. You know, there's Up Your Ass, which I'd like to read now. I mean, that sounds like a good time. Just something she had written here and there. Really is a tragedy that that work was lost, because I'm sure there's many people like me who would be very interested to read more from her writings. Something I also found quite interesting, she didn't touch on this a ton. Really, the entire book is about how men are shit and we should get rid of them all. Which, yeah, quite entertaining. But she did mention the move towards this women's utopia should occur not only through the eradication of men, but through automation, which I found, you know, so interesting that she was so pro automation. And just the idea of automation is something that is both so intimidating to us as humans, because it is a loss of our free will, and it can also mean a loss of our skills, you know, over time that we've adapted. Not that you can't get them back, but totally something so relevant right now when we're talking about living in a more automated world. Part of My Soul Went With Him by Winnie Mandela. This is a nonfiction book, memoir of Winnie Mandela's life, her activism in the anti-apartheid movement. She was Nelson Mandela's second wife, and she was very involved during his time in prison. She was repeatedly imprisoned, jailed, constantly put on trial under surveillance. She was banished. She really went through a lot and was incredibly resilient during this time, and during the time of Nelson's imprisonment, to be on the outside and separated, and the unknown of you know, your life partner's well-being is something that I mean, it's unimaginable to me. She is someone that I've known a little bit about. I've been reading quite a few books on the history of apartheid in South Africa. Primarily nonfiction I've been reading. However, I do want to read some more fiction that talks about apartheid. I read Cry the Beloved Country by Alan Paton last year. That was so good. That is such a hidden gem, and really, really good book that I think more people should read. But yeah, this was another one in my pursuit of just learning some more about that time period, the people who were involved, and yeah, just their experiences that, of course, were so difficult, and just the perseverance one had to keep fighting for this cause. In the Margins on the Pleasures of Reading and Writing by Elena Ferrante, one of my favorite authors, on one of my favorite things to read authors write about, on their process and what they're reading, what has influenced them, the things they are considering when fashioning together their novel. This is 4 essays that were actually given as speeches, though not by Ferrante herself, because she is anonymous. I connect so deeply with her writing, and as someone who feel like a Ferrante super fan, I want to read everything she's written, and I am, of course, fascinated by what she has read and the things that have impacted her work, or even if they haven't really, fully shaped her work in a way that there's an obvious connection, but just people she has learned from by reading and studying their craft. So things I added to my want to read list from this was Malloy by Samuel Beckett. This is the first in a series that she mentions by Samuel Beckett. Gaspara Stampa, her poetry is mentioned in here. And Zeno's Consciousness by Italo Svevo. This is 3 things I've never heard of before, mentioned by Elena Ferrante. I now want to read them. Final essay in this collection is about Dante and the Inferno, and that's not something I've read yet. I bet if you had read that, you would find that essay amazing. It certainly was beautiful to me, though I didn't connect with it as I did the other ones, because I do think to really, of course, to get everything out of it, you needed to have read that book. So I got to read that book and go back to it. And just also, the fact that Elena Ferrante read it in its original Italian, I'm sure was even more affecting for her, and an amazing experience to be able to have. I think I only have like 1 or 2 of Elena Ferrante's works left. I've kind of been holding out on finishing her up because I don't want to. It's just so wonderful to experience her words for the first time, but I know it is beautiful to experience them again and again. And so I think this summer I will be rereading the Neapolitan Quartet, which I'm so eager to do. And the final book I'll talk about is the Mobius book by Catherine Lacey. This book is not yet out. It comes out in mid-June. I read an advanced reader's copy from NetGalley. And Catherine Lacey is an author I'm fascinated with, and the things that she is trying to do in her work are very interesting. The Mobius book takes its name from the Mobius strip. If you have a long strip of paper like this, a long thin strip, and you put a twist in it and then connect the 2 ends, you have a continuous strip. It is one-sided now. And it's also eternal. There is no end or beginning anymore. And she took that idea and used that for her book here. One half of it is fiction, and it follows 2 characters who are really just kind of having a discussion about the end of one of their marriages. There's divorce. It was messy, and they are hashing it all out. Very conversational. There's a lot of dialogue happening here. But also at the same time, they are being drawn back to the fact that they're in an apartment complex, and under the neighbor's door seems to be like a pool of blood seeping out. They just keep, talking about the divorce and all this drama. And then it comes it's in the subconscious though, and you as the reader are thinking, oh my gosh, like, is that really blood, like, coming out from the neighbor's apartment? Like, that's sketchy. What's going on over there? But they are, you know, they're both aware of it. They acknowledge it, but at the same time, they do nothing to act. And sometimes it comes more forward into their thinking or the dialogue again. And they're like, yeah, what was that? What's going on over there? But is not the focus. The focus is on this disintegration of the relationship. And kind of has an abrupt end. And you get to the second half of the book, which is Catherine Lacey's account of her divorce. It is nonfiction, so she's speaking from her own experience and her experience with the divorce that she went through with her ex-husband, who is also an author. And very painful experience, of course, as it would be for anyone, but quite similar, you know. Again, we're looking at similarities between the two parts. Dramatic, quite dramatic. She was broken up with, you know, and the end of a marriage occurred through an email, which, gosh, I literally can't imagine how infuriating this experience would have been, and all the other emotions this experience would have brought. She reflects on her religious upbringing that she is no longer, you know, connected with or aligned to. She kind of reevaluates things. She is dealing with the loss of identity and self in a way. Her life, and I really appreciate people's honesty when it comes to things like this. I think that there is only value in sharing. Though I do think there are ethical things to think about when, you know, for lack of better words, airing the dirty laundry is happening. The decision to do that, I think, is interesting. Not to say one shouldn't or one should, but I think it is something to think about. And I was thinking about while reading this. I wasn't aware of Catherine Lacey's divorce prior, or that she was married to another author. Do I want to read his work now? I do, actually. And I love reading for that reason, and the connections that you can make from one thing to the next. You know, the same thing that I really just kind of pursued through this month in a way, with Short History of Trans Misogyny leading me to read Vivek Shraya's memoir, In the Margins by Elena Ferrante, me taking down the three books that she referenced in there, or pieces that I'm now very interested in. I, after reading Catherine Lacey's piece here, Googled her ex-husband and took a couple names of his books down that I am interested in now. That experience is something I really love about reading. It brings me so much joy, because it's the pursuit of, at least for myself, the pursuit of knowledge. I'm just curious and love to learn, and to be more aware and more in the know of these things. So that was May. This video was really super miserable to make because I'm sick. I've been coughing throughout this entire thing, and I've had to cut a ton of shit out. Hopefully I'm feeling better. Hopefully I'm feeling better soon. And yeah, let me know what you've been reading and what you're reading next. Bye.